It's a pleasure to welcome you to African Women in Media 2023. All protocols observed. I'm pleased to also honor our dignitaries, Ms. Yolande Makolo, government spokesperson in Rwanda, Mr. Arthur Zimwe, who is on his way, Director General of the Rwanda Broadcasting Agency, Ambassador Joanna Teague. Thank you so much for joining us. She's the ambassador, Swedish ambassador to Rwanda. Madam Latifa Akabach, who is the president of Morocco's High Authority for Audiovisual Communication. Thank you all so much for joining us today. So colleagues, I'm going to invite all of us to close our eyes for a moment. If you could just humor me and just close your eyes for a moment. Imagine a world where there was no longer a need for us to talk about gender-based violence, where there was no longer a need to develop policies and declarations that addresses sexual harassment, online harassment, where there was no longer a need to have to urge media to include women's perspectives in their content and in their organizational practices, the way they work, the way they think. Now open your eyes. This is possible. This world can exist because of a moment in history when a room full of people of all genders from different parts of the world decided to unite and to demand accountable results when it comes to gender equality and the adequate representation of gender-based violence. And that moment is today. This world can exist because of a moment in history when a room full of people of all genders from different parts of the world decided to unite and to demand accountable results when it comes to gender equality and the adequate representation of gender-based violence. And that moment is today. We are here today, the 7th African Women in Media Conference, to unite, to set the bar higher in our industry's commitment to address how it reports gender-based violence and how it creates enabling environments for its female staff. But to achieve this, we must first talk. We must discuss. We must share our lived experiences. And we must learn from the efforts of those who have made all the efforts so far. And then we can agree on what our demands are going forward. Over the next 2 days, we'll hear from journalists, filmmakers, academics, policy actors, development professionals, media leaders, civil society, and students. And they will share their expert insights, their lived experiences, their best practices, their call to action. And all of this will feed into the Kigali Declaration on the elimination of gender violence in and through media. So at this point, let me acknowledge those organizations and individuals whose support has made it possible for all of us to be here. First, our local partners, Foyo Media Institute and Mount Kigali University. So AWiM and Foyo have collaborated on several projects since 2020. And one of the ones that I am most proud of are 2 pieces of research that we did that looked into the lived experiences of women journalists. The first looked at Sub-Sahara, so the whole continent across the whole Sub-Saharan Africa, in terms of the lived experience of women journalists in all the countries there. And then the second looked specifically at the experiences of women journalists in Rwanda. So the outcome of both studies has guided much of our work in the last 3 years. And through Foyo's work in Rwanda, we've been able to connect with several of the Rwanda Women in Media associations. So it's a pleasure to see so many of you represented in this room. And one of the parallel sessions that we'll be having this morning is a fishbowl discussion led by the representatives from the Rwanda Media Women Associations, as well as representatives from the Somalia Women Journalist Organization and the Ethiopia Media Women Association. The Rwanda Broadcasting Agency, through the leadership of its Director General, Arthur Zimwe, has been an exemplary example of leaders that take the step, that have the will to support themes like media and gender violence, but also in tackling sexual harassment in the newsroom. And we are pleased to have RBA as our official media partner. And in our keynote panel following these opening remarks this morning, we will hear from Mr. Azimwe regarding RBA's vision relating to the conference theme today. Next, we have MacArthur Foundation, with whom we have partnered in our conferences since 2021. And in partnership with MacArthur Foundation and the Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism, we are concluding the second year of a 3-year project that is titled Reporting Violence Against Women and Girls in Nigeria. MacArthur Foundation are keen to invest in the future and voices of women journalists. They're keen to center women's experiences in our understanding of media sustainability and to understand the best practices in developing platforms that sufficiently resist and respond to gender-based violence and gender equality and social inclusion. So as you engage with all the sessions over the next 2 days, I want us all to have this question in mind. How can organizations like MacArthur Foundation invest in securing gender equality and social inclusion when it comes to media and media sustainability? In the plenary panel tomorrow morning, we'll be hearing more around media sustainability, and everybody here will have the opportunity to share their experiences from their newsrooms regarding issues and ways in which we can support media business and financial models. We are, of course, also grateful for the support of Wanifra Women in News, the WITS Journalism Africa-China Reporting Program, Rwanda Air, UNESCO, and UN Women. And both UNESCO and UN Women have led global campaigns to address gender-based violence. So it's a pleasure to have Ms. Misako Ito, who's the Regional Advisor of Communication and Information in Africa at UNESCO, join us today. And Ms. Ito will be joining the panel this morning to share insights around UNESCO's research and campaign and to give us that global and regional overview. So I see a lot of familiar faces in the crowd, so many of you know how we end the AWiM conference with our dinner and celebrations and cultural presentations. So, and this year is not going to be an exception. We will be ending tomorrow's, the second day with a dinner here. It's going to be amazing. And the theme is African elegance. So I can see some of you are already preparing for that. Rachel Mbaka over there, okay? So, and we're honored to have UN Women who will be premiering their film, Jirani, which is produced by a Tanzanian filmmaker called Gertrude Sigonda. Okay. So, UN's Women's theme for this year's 16 Days of Activism is Unite, Invest to Prevent Violence Against Women and Girls. Okay, so unite, invest to prevent violence against women and girls. So when I was researching that theme and looking at the explanation about that theme on their websites, they begin by posing an important question, a very important question. And the question is, how much does the world care about ending violence against women and girls? How much does the world care about ending violence against women and girls? And to which the answer is, we don't know. But the thing is, we need to know. We must know. Because if we don't know, how else can all the things that I asked us to close our eyes and imagine at the beginning of my speech, how else can they become a reality? We need to know, and we need to make people care. As media practitioners, academics, policy actors, civil society, we are in a privileged position to help our societies care. And we have the privileged position to hold policymakers accountable for the policies that they develop to address gender-based violence. But whilst we do that as media practitioners, we must also clean up our own house. So here's our call for media organizations and media leaders. Invest in your female staff and prevent your environments, your newsrooms, from being susceptible to gender-related violence. They're a part of your team. They are you. You must care and you must act. So over the next 2 days, we'll hear from expert speakers, build our capacity through workshops, and contribute our knowledge and expertise to the Kigali Declaration on the Elimination of Gender Violence in and through media. If we work together, we will no longer have to imagine a world where we don't need to talk about gender-based violence. If we work together, we don't have to imagine a world where we have to develop policies and declarations that addresses gender-based violence, where media includes women's perspectives in their contents and in their organizational practices. And that journey, it starts today. Thank you very much for your attention. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our guest of honor, Ms. Yolande Makolo, government spokesperson in Rwanda, to the stage.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Dear delegates, muraho. So I'd like to thank Dr. Yemisi and the colleagues at African Women in Media for choosing Rwanda to host this conference, as well as all the wonderful partners who are involved. Also, a very warm welcome to all our guests who have traveled to Kigali for this meeting. Karibuni sana. So I know that you have a very busy 2 days that will culminate in a declaration to eliminate gender violence in the media sector. This is important work, and we thank you for this effort. It is a fact that women journalists are often subjected to targeted violence, harassment, and different forms of intimidation in the newsroom and in the field. The digital space has also become a platform where women journalists, more so than their male counterparts, are exposed to online attacks. On the plus side, women play a critical role, all of you do, in the fight against gender-based violence against others through the stories that you tell and how you tell them. So just like many other issues we are faced with, leadership plays a critical role in addressing GBV in and out of the newsrooms. In Rwanda, we have had extreme experiences of gender-based violence because of our particular history. Addressing this problem was a priority for the post-genocide leadership in Rwanda. This is why we have worked very hard on being intentional and consistent about educating women and the rest of society about our rights and laws protecting women and girls, about raising awareness of gender-based violence in workplaces, newsrooms included, and in our homes, and ensuring that perpetrators are punished in accordance with the law. This work continues because there's a lot to be done still. But much progress has been made in putting in place the institutions, policies and laws, as well as human resources that are needed to deal with this problem. Notably, this includes the Isanje One-Stop Center, a holistic response to gender-based violence, which started as a project of the Rwandan National Police and has now scaled up to 48 district hospitals across the country. So in short, good governance and good leadership is essential. However, we in government, together with media organizations and civil society, need to collaborate even closer to empower and protect women journalists. The goal really should be for everyone involved in the media sector to give their best, and for our societies to benefit from the important work that journalists do. We want both African boys and girls to aspire to be great journalists or media executives, and to feel welcome, supported, and fulfilled in this profession. So as Yemisi said earlier, let's keep working together to make this a reality. Allow me to conclude with a quote from a champion of women empowerment, President Paul Kagame, who said, "The only way to think about violence against women and girls is as a violation of rights, a crime, and indeed a threat to progress in Africa and around the world. To call it anything else would only add to the assault." So I thank you once again for coming together here in Kigali, and I wish you a productive and enjoyable time here. Murakoze cyane.
Thank you very much, Ms. Yolande Makolo. Now, I'd like to remind for interpretation channels, English it's 4 and French it's 5. Allow me to welcome Joanne Teague, the Swedish ambassador to Rwanda, for her remark. Please welcome.
Dear delegates, dear Yolande Makolo, spokesperson of the Rwandan government, dear Arthur Asimwe, DG of RBA, dear Jemisi Akimbobola, Amina, Anneli Frank. It's so very, very nice to be here and to see all of you. A very good morning to you all. It's a great honor for me to speak at this event and to meet all of you inspiring women and men working for an equal media sector. Thank you, Dr. Jemisi, for your energy and your leadership. And thank you, team of African women in media, for organizing this important event. I'm really proud that Sweden is able to contribute to making it happen. The theme of the conference, Media and Gender Violence, is as important as it is timely. Today marks the 6th day of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. We all know the facts. Every year, around the world, 245 million women and girls experience physical and sexual violence by their partners. And more than 4 in 5 women live in countries without sufficient legislation and legal protection against GBV. Meanwhile, new technologies make way for new kinds of violence. Almost 4 out of 10 women globally have experienced online violence. Against these immense challenges, media has a great role to play. It's a force for social transformation with the potential to support societies in ending violence and discrimination. Media content has a huge potential in changing mindsets and norms about men and women. Based on the excellent study by AWiM and Fojo that was already mentioned, Barriers to Women Journalists in Rwanda, the embassy hosted a seminar in May 2021, helping raise the issue in the national debate. According to the study, 45% of the respondents had been sexually harassed in the media job. 45%. I think that was a wake-up call for many of us. So let me salute the many actors here in Rwanda who are working very strongly to change that situation. The leadership of the Rwandan government is invaluable in embracing the call to address challenges of women in media. I understand that the upcoming media policy has a very strong commitment to address sexual harassment in the workplace of journalists. In the same way, the work of women journalist associations is key. This unified movement has turned the spotlight on the realities of the female journalist and the prevalence of GBV in the sector. They are also providing everyday practical help to journalists facing sexual harassment. The media houses themselves, some of them here today, have taken the issue seriously and are increasingly committed to furthering equality in their respective organizations. Several media houses are either drafting or implementing gender policies. And only a fortnight ago, 34 media houses signed a landmark industry policy on ending sexual harassment. Whoa. Yeah? And the RBA, the largest media house in the country, has set a goal that 45% of voices heard should be of women and girls, and monitoring the figures closely. Decisions like this make a difference, and I therefore challenge all the media houses here present today to actively decide to bring out female voices. Show women not as victims, but as agents for change, experts, and the leaders we are. Gender equality is a key priority for Swedish diplomacy and for our development cooperation. And we are working together with partner countries across Africa, like Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, Liberia, and Zambia, to ensure that media development places women front and center. This is also the case here in Rwanda, where we support media development through a sector-wide capacity building program together with our partners FOJO and Swedish Radio Media Development Office, led by them. There's a special focus here in Rwanda on violence against women in the media industry itself. We need to ensure positive values in the newsrooms to be able to make a change outside of the newsrooms. So before I end, let me thank and congratulate you on the initiative of the Kigali Declaration. It's a really important contribution and milestone that will strengthen our joint drive towards further progressing social norms in media to end violence against women. And I think it's also going to inspire other regions to follow suit. I hope, given all of these commitments, in a few years' time when we meet up, we can see tangible evidence that women in media can work with safety and integrity, that they can advance in their careers and be paid on par with male colleagues. And I hope that more young women will actively seek the profession of journalist to tell their stories. So let us work together as a family to end violence and empower women both inside and outside of our organizations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I remind everyone that the interpretation channels, for English it's 4 and for French it's 5. Allow me to welcome right now Anneli Frank, representing the Rwanda Media Program, for her remark. Please welcome.
So, dear spokesperson of Rwandan government, dear ambassador of Sweden, dear presenters, moderators, dear AWiM team, and dear participants. Congrats to you all for coming here, attending AWiM 2023 and these historical days when the Kigali Declaration on the Elimination of Gender Violence in and through media in Africa will be formed. It's amazing. You are here. I did not see this day coming, me standing here, so proud to welcome you all 25 years ago. 25 years ago, I started my work as a journalist in a newsroom for sport. It was 2 women and 8 men in that newsroom. And no, there was no gender-based violence in that newsroom. But I had to listen to my male colleagues' comments about parts of women's bodies almost every day. They commented on female colleagues' bodies, on female athletes' bodies, even female supervisors' bodies. When I had to enter the room where the printing was controlled, I also had to pass several posters of nude women. No, I was not hurt physically. But anyway, it did something to me. It was something about being surrounded with people that so open showed their attitude against women. And I don't think that any of my colleagues in the newsroom with that attitude against women used gender-based violence as a way forward in their lives. But I'm pretty sure that those who do use gender-based violence share this attitude. I'm also pretty sure that all this, the attitude in the newsroom, affected how men and women were reported about in the paper, how pictures were used, how it was reported about gender-based violence. Yes, we have that in my home country, Sweden, as well. And how important or not important the paper took gender issues overall in their reporting. I am sure that the attitude in that newsroom formed the content in that paper, and that content in the next step affected attitudes and keep attitudes already there in the society. Because this is what media do, affect the society on so many levels. The media and journalists can do so much more in order to stop gender-based violence. And I am convinced that almost everyone in this room already are doing a lot. For example, already mentioned, last week 34 media houses here in Rwanda signed Rwanda Media Anti-Sexual Harassment Policy, with guidelines and recommendations for them how to handle the issue in their own workspace. This was something that I growed from the media industry itself. The managers in these 34 media houses have committed to make a change to start where they have the power to impact. But we as the media sector can do even more, both in our own workspace, but also in our reporting, in order to change attitudes and in the prolonged change the issue with gender-based violence. And today and tomorrow, we all in this room will do more. And now I will share a small dream. What if the Kigali Declaration on the Elimination of Gender Violence in and through media in Africa can be a shining and inspiring example, a role model for the rest of the world to create their own declarations? That would be cool. So once again, congrats to you all for being here. And of course, thank you to the Rwanda Media Program donors, SIDA in Sweden and SGC in Switzerland. Without you, Rwanda Media Program and the partners couldn't go on and be one of several engines for change. Thank you so much. Enjoy your days.
I'm going to welcome Dr. Amina Salihu from MacArthur Foundation for her remark.
Your Excellencies, leaders of Africa, friends of Africa here present, good morning. It's an honor to stand before you on behalf of the MacArthur Foundation to thank you for prioritizing this conversation this morning. Because you could have been somewhere else, but you chose to be here, because hopefully you know this issue absolutely matters. I would like to begin by thanking the AWiM team. My sister Yemisi, Dele, and Irene were here late last night into 2 a.m. this morning, I believe, putting all of these wonderful events that you're experiencing right now together. Now, it takes energy to do this kind of work and trust women to make it happen. But it takes character to sustain on this kind of scale, these kinds of conversations. And here we are at the 7th AWiM conference. Thank you, the AWiM team, for your character, your competence, and your capacity. The MacArthur Foundation has been in Africa for about 30 years now, and it's been our charge to support creative institutions, influential networks, and individuals who have the courage to act and to seek the difference they want to see. And you can tell that all of that is coming together in this room and beyond this room. We have a very powerful network in here. We have institutions that have been affirmed. We have individuals who are very certain about what they need to do. And at the heart of all of this is the nature and the character of the media itself, of journalism itself. Because you cannot be speaking truth to power and not be able to speak it to yourself. It's a question of accountability to oneself, accountability to each other, and then demanding accountability of others. And that is why we continue to support media and journalism on the African continent and beyond. Just 2 months ago, the foundation launched another idea called Press Forward. And the notion of Press Forward, which is actually based in the US as a start, is really to collaborate or bring donors together to ensure that the resources are not being balkanized, but that the resources find the challenges that we need to address, and to ensure that local communities get the kind of news that they deserve in record time. And 22 development partners have come together to raise $500 million, halfway to raising $1 billion. Now, well, thank you very much. This kind of resource can only make the difference it needs to make if the individuals who should make the resource work are happy and their well-being is centered. And no one's well-being can be centered when they are experiencing gender-based violence at every turn. I live and work in a country, Nigeria, where gender-based violence used to be thought of as something personal, hidden, and domestic. But now it's becoming a matter for public policy with laws and policies in place. Because feminists have always known that the personal is political. You can't change who you are, you can't change your experience just because you're crossing borders or barriers. It is the same you. And I hope and I charge that as we come up with the Kigali Declaration, that we will truly name what violence looks like. Because it seems to me that sometimes there isn't a clear understanding and agreement as to the nature, the insidious nature of violence, and that probably has to be our starting point. It cannot be small, it cannot be big. Violence is violence. It's got to be labeled, it's got to be recognized, it's got to be stopped. So, I look forward to saying more tomorrow when we host a session on sustainability, because we've had a lot of conversations around sustainability of the media, but we're yet to have a conversation where women's experiences are centered. And gender equity and social inclusion continues to matter in the work that we do. So on behalf of the MacArthur Foundation, I wish you a very, very fruitful 2 days. Thank you.
Welcome, Mr. Arthur Asimwe, the Director General to the Rwanda Public Service Media, which is Rwanda Broadcasting Agency, RBA, for his remark.
The government spokesperson, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'll be extremely brief with my remarks. Number one, I'm extremely happy and proud to be a male standing here and championing the cause of gender equality, but also making sure that we do away with these terrible bad habits of gender violence in our newsrooms. So I'm proud to be standing here today to champion that. I think in Rwanda we are extremely lucky. We start from a very good note. There's strong political commitment from our leadership to ensure that gender equality, gender emancipation is true and happening. So for us, we like we start from a very, very good note. And we need to thank our leadership for ensuring that all these things we're talking about are even enshrined in our constitution. So I just wanted to say that we are happy to be associated with this initiative as RBA. We welcome you to Kigali. We're looking forward to 2 days of constructive discussions, and we're willing to learn a lot, especially we, the men, learn a lot from you, and especially the media owners, media managers, learn a lot on how to deal with this issue, how to handle these bad behaviors that are happening within our midst. I thank you so much, and I look forward to enriching conversations.
I'm going to welcome Dr. Yemisi. Right now, we're going to start like the first panel discussions, and it's going to be keynote on media and gender violence. Please welcome.
All right, so good morning again. We're going to start the conference with a distinguished keynote panel that would help us set the scene around the theme, media and gender violence, and especially the declaration, okay? But before I go into that, I wanted to share how proud we are of this. This is the first AWiM magazine. It's the first AWiM magazine. It was a project of love and labor, and I want to really acknowledge my team, Janet Otieno, who was the editorial lead for the magazine. Janet, is Janet in the room? Yes, there she is. Sam, our designer, Irene, Joy, Dele, who dragged me to a photo shoot for the cover. But I hope you'll find it a useful reference. It contains several of our projects and articles around gender-based violence, the work of our partners. For your Media Institute have a page there on fact-checking, and we're really proud of it. So this is hopefully the first of many AWiM magazines. So please do take your copy and have a look through it. Thank you so much. All right, so the declaration. Before we start the panel, I would like to first acknowledge the support and hard work that went into putting together the draft declaration, which you've all received in your emails, but also in your welcome packs today. And I had the pleasure of working with an international committee chaired by the one and only Dr. Sarah Macharia over there, and made up of 13 members from across 11 countries. So I'm going to name them one by one, so pardon me, and ask that we show them our appreciation for all their hard work. So first, Dr. Sarah Macharia, who was the chair of the committee. Mr. Arthur Azimwe, who was the vice chair. Agneta Soderberg-Jacobson, who was the secretary. And then the following members, Professor Oluyinka Eson, Rachel Ombaka, who's over there, Comfort Musa, where are you? Professor Essence from Nigeria, Rachel Kenya, Comfort from Cameroon, Rebecca Ekpe, who's from Ghana, Paul Louis Tomasi, Rebecca over there, Paul Louis Tomasi from the Gambia, Malcolm Solomon from Ethiopia, Dinesh Belai from South Africa, Susan Makore from Tanzania, Misako Ito from Japan, and Wambisa Makuga from South Africa. So thank you all so much for your hard work. So hopefully you've all would have read the declaration. If you're not, please do so before our session tomorrow. As you know, we're going to be having a roundtable co-designing the declaration. We have a draft, but now we need to hear your experiences and to make sure that we have everything covered in there. So please do have a read before then. Now, before we start the panel, we're going to start with a poll question. Are we ready with the poll question? I would ask you to all bring out your smart devices, so your tablets or your phones, and to scan this QR code. So using your camera, if you focus on it, it will bring out a link. All right, so time now for me to welcome our keynote panelists to the stage. I'll be giving their bios one by one and invite them to come and join us on the stage. So joining us today are Dr. Sarah Macharia. Dr. Macharia is the Gender and Communications Manager at the World Association for Christian Communication and the General Secretary of the Global Alliance on Media and Gender. She led the 2021 Global Media Monitoring Project, a transnational research and advocacy initiative for gender equality in and through news media, which has run since 1991 in more than 100 countries. And she's also the principal author of the 2010 and 2015 Who Makes the News, the Global Media Monitoring Projects. Please welcome Dr. Sarah Macharia. Thank you. Next is Mr. Arthur Azimwe, who is the Director General of the Rwanda Broadcasting Agency and President of the African Union of Broadcasters. As Director General of Rwanda's public broadcaster, Mr. Azimwe oversees a network of 3 television stations, 8 radio stations, and a digital online platform. And under his tenure, he has transformed RBA into an independent public broadcaster with a strong foot across Rwanda and the region. Mr. Azimwe has been a journalist for over 20 years, serving both local and international media. Next is Misako Ito, who is the Regional Advisor of Communication and Information in Africa. She's an expert on information communication with 18 years of experience working with the United Nations and development organizations in Africa, Europe, Arab states, and Asia. And prior to joining UNESCO in Nairobi, she worked at the UNESCO Regional Office in Bangkok, where she led the UNESCO Memory of the World program in Asia and the Pacific. And during the post-Arab Spring period, she advised the government of Morocco and Tunisia for the reform of the media sector, the legislation on freedom of information, and the participation of women and youth in public policy. Welcome, Ms. Ito. And last but not the least, Agneta Soderberg-Jacobson, Senior Gender Advisor with Foyer Media Institute at Linnaeus University. Agneta has more than 25 years of experience in media development and is a specialist in the field of gender and media. She's a trained journalist with a background as a stringer covering the former Soviet republics. She's managing a global project that maps gender equality in media regulation and self-regulation, and that so far covers 6 countries. She has also been part of developing the concept of sustainable journalism, which is a holistic approach to journalism that puts gender equality and diversity at the heart of the future of journalism. Welcome, Agneta. So media and gender violence is as much a theme for the conference as it is a call for action. It's a global issue, and regionally here in Africa, we obviously have our own context to contend with as well. So let's start this conversation by understanding the global situation regarding gender-based violence, both in society and the media, including, of course, online violence. Misako, I know that UNESCO has produced several insights on this, so can you start us off with a global context?
Okay, thank you very much, MEC, and thank you also for, associating UNESCO in these conversations. So UNESCO has released a number of studies over the past years in relation to the topic of media and gender violence. And I would like to maybe, briefly raise, there are basically 3 topics that really need to be part of the declarations. One is the violence experienced by women working in the media sector, women journalists, and we already talked about that in the opening, the media representation of gender-based violence, but also recently the technology facilitated gender-based violence. So that's target, most often the women who are visible on digital platforms and social media. So one of the research findings that we have from a research that we have undertaken 2 years ago is, the UNESCO's the Chilling, which presented the global trend in online violence against women journalists. It showed that 73% of women journalists have experienced a form of online violence. And what is striking is to see that, and 20% of women have been attacked in the reality, in the offline space, in relation to already receive online attacks. So what is happening in the online space has a direct implication in the real world. And so the threat, include, many, different forms: physical violence, sexual violence, combined with digital security attacks. And the common trend is that most of the attacks are not necessarily targeting the works that the women journalists have been producing, but have some connotation relating to the woman's body, woman's physical features. So that's a very important characteristic that we have to note when it comes to gender-based violence. I will not, talk a lot about the media representation of gender-based violence, because there is another expert who will be mentioning that. But, and also the Swedish ambassador has also mentioned this morning, another issue which is striking is also the issue of sexual harassment in the newsroom. She mentioned this morning the figure of 45%, and which is also confirmed by the statistic from the World Association of Newspaper. More than 41% of women journalists have experienced verbal or physical harassment in the workplace, and only 1 in 5 report the incident. So there is a shocking silence around these phenomenon. And in the few cases that were reported, only half of the cases have been taken by the media organizations, and most often it was limited in reminding the perpetrators, in warning the perpetrators. So we see clearly from those findings that the newsrooms lack some capacity to report and to respond on the gender-based violence. And we have a number of, underlying conditions that I'm sure you are all aware, and that was already raised during the discussion on the Beijing platforms, the underrepresentation of women in the leadership, the societal stigma when reporting those incidents, the pay gap between women and men in the media sectors, but also, some of the precarious working conditions for women journalists. And very briefly, the last point that I want to raise is now, so all these threats have been amplified by the technologies. And if you haven't had a chance to look at it, I would really like to invite you to look at the UNESCO study that we published recently, which is called Technology Facilitated Gender-Based Violence, and which shows some really warning trends that AI and the generative AI has amplified and increased the potential and the impact of all this harm targeting women and girls. And we have the very shocking figures of 58% of young women have already faced gender-based violence on social media. So that's not necessarily women journalists or women media workers. It's basically 58% of women and girls. And in most of the cases, the majority of applications that were developed to protect women put the responsibility on the victim themselves instead of, creating a condition or putting the responsibility either on the platform regulators or so the victim has to protect itself, which is not acceptable. And as I mentioned, the generative AI, because of the algorithm and the structures, it has this way of, amplifying, increasing the potential of the attack by creating realistic fake media, ability to build a false narrative which sound realistic, and increase the number of attacks through, automated harassment system, etc. So I really would like these, conversations really focus on those topics, the violence experiences by women working in the media sectors, how the media cover the representation of gender-based violence, and also the technology facilitated gender-based violence.
Thank you very much, Sako. Very important, thank you. Yes. I think one of the key takeaways there is the fact that by not dealing with it now, it then transfers into digital platforms, emerging media like AI. And as I mentioned earlier on, in African countries, we of course have our own contexts in addition to all of the global kind of issues generally. So Dr. Macharia, where are we when it comes to media and gender violence in Africa?
Thank you, Dr. MSc, and it's really a privilege to have this space to present the data. And even before I start, I'd like to just express gratitude to those in the room who've taken part in collecting the data. I know that we have Uganda Media Women's Association represented here who have done this. We have TAMWA and GEMSA, the Gender and Media Southern Africa. We have HACA, the High Authority on Audiovisual Communication, and I'm sure there are many others. So the evidence actually shows that we have a long way to go in Africa. At the regional level, Africa has always, since 1995 when this data was first collected, has always been at the tail end of all gender indicators in the news media across the world when we compare this to other regions. Of course, there are some country exceptions like South Africa and Namibia, Eswatini, who are among the top 20 performers out of 100 countries. Considering gender violence specifically, I think it is fitting to start by saying that the media's role is acknowledged in international and in regional policy instruments like the Maputo Protocol, the Beijing Platform for Action. They all talk about how media have a role in eliminating gender-based violence through portrayal and representation, through the ways in which media present or propagate discriminatory social norms, and in how they present the issues. Globally, we know the data. Ambassador Teague talked about part of the data. We also heard about some of the data from UNESCO. 1 in 3 women is a gender violence survivor, and the proportion is even higher on online violence. We have data that is all over the map, from 58% that was quoted here to 90% of women and girls in online spaces who report having experienced online violence. This is recent data from the Economic Intelligence Unit in 2022. So data from the Global Media Monitoring Project indicate that gender-based violence is hardly newsworthy, at least in Africa, all over the world, but in Africa especially. In Africa, just 1% of stories cover issues on gender-based violence, just 1%. And Africa is in the company of other regions like Europe and the Caribbean, which is also just 1%. In some regions, there's absolutely no news on top of the news agenda that's about gender-based violence, yet we understand that this is the most pervasive form of human rights violations in the world. 2/3 of, and so that's about the quantity of content on gender-based violence. And here we're talking about stories to do with, say, sexual harassment, rape, intimate partner violence, all kinds of violences that women face, both online and offline. When it comes to the sources and subjects in the news, 2/3 of those we hear, we see, we read about in mainstream news media are women in gender-based violence stories. Who are the other 1/3? The other 1/3 are male experts who are speaking or as, medical professionals, as politicians, and others, as spokespersons. Let's come to reporting. This is also one of the indicators that the Global Media Monitoring Project collects, reporting. In Africa, women report 2/3. Let's see. Yeah, they tend to cover twice as many GBV stories as men, twice as much. And the quality of coverage on GBV by women experts is 2.5 times higher than that reported by their male colleagues. And in fact, when we come to the issue of gender stereotypes, not a single story on gender-based violence by men reporters challenges gender stereotypes. Not a single story. And this is compared to almost 4 in 10 stories by women journalists. So we see what role we have to play there for women who work in the media. And there's some good news, though. In Africa, gender-based violence journalism performs better in terms of clearly challenging gender stereotypes compared to journalism across the rest of the world. 22% of stories on gender-based violence clearly challenge gender stereotypes compared to the global average of 19%. And Africa falls lower than Europe, where it's 30% of stories, and we are followed closely by Asia. So we have a long way to go, and we know that in terms of content, the extent to which content will clearly challenge gender stereotypes, will have a balanced and fair representation, that also has implications on the lived realities of girls and women. So in general, this is where we are at.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dr. Muchara. I think that shows yes, absolutely. Yeah. I think it demonstrates the importance of having the data that really paints a very clear picture of why we need to address this issue. So thank you so much. Now, this is the first AWiM conference where we've kind of focused on a very narrow topic. We've been very kind of broader in our focus. And it's also the first time that we'll end up producing a declaration, and I believe this will be the first declaration of its type. So, and we and our partners have done several studies, some of which I talked about in my opening remarks, around the lived experience of women in media. And one of the significant things it reveals is the range of the nature of the violence experienced by women in media, but also the range of who the perpetrators are. Sometimes it's the boss, sometimes it's the sources, sometimes it's audiences. Okay. So panel, can you share with us some of your research on the current situation and how the declaration addresses this? Agneta, I'm going to start with you first because AWiM23, you have done some joint research in this area.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Yemisi, and good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. It's fantastic to be here, to be part of this collective effort to form this Kigali Declaration. And I wanted to start to tell you a little bit about the joint research that AWiM23 have done. So in 2020, we embarked on this joint research project together. And the aim was to get a clearer and deeper understanding of the barriers to women journalists to enter, to stay, and to progress in the media industry. And we started out with a comparative study covering 17 African countries and with 125 female respondents. And we followed up with a country-specific study in Rwanda that has already been referred to several times this morning, and this is the report that you can get it out in the lobby. And more countries are to come, and we hope that the next report will cover Ethiopia. So what did we find? You've already heard a few things. We found a pattern that captures a wide definition of gender-based violence. The most shared experience was the gendered allocation of resources and assignments, and that has to do with what kind of stories women get to report on, what kind of roles they would have in the media organization. Secondly, the second most shared experience was about sexual harassment. And this report is full of heartbreaking stories and deeply upsetting testimonies. There are also multiple stories about sextortion when someone entrusted with power actually exploit this sexually. I mean, a typical example in the media business would be when a media manager would ask for sexual favors from a female employee. So we also have many stories of this. There's also gendered bullying, belittling, also related to being a woman. But if we apply a wider definition of gender-based violence, we would also include like women earning less than men, their male colleagues, less career opportunities, and less opportunities for training. So for the Rwanda, this was actually what I showed you was the Rwanda report. It was actually sexual harassment that stood out the most, and you've already heard a number of 45% of women journalists here in Rwanda that have explicitly been exposed to targeted by sexual harassment. 54%, more than half, say they have been negatively impacted by sexual harassment. And 38%, this is high, say that they have been influenced. 38% say they've been influenced in the decision to leave or considering leaving the profession. I thought I'd give you a quote from the report, just a second. It's here that I think captures very well what it's all about. I have experienced sexual abuse from almost all of my supervisors. I've had to fight one boss off, and another one almost raped me, and my refusal to date any of them caused me so much harm. I was given terrible beats, treated badly by my bosses, and when I complained to my fellow female colleagues, I was told it is normal. So this is a depressing quote, really. And that was anonymous, so I don't know from what country that was. So all in all, this makes up a toxic cocktail that makes women to hesitate to even enter the profession, and again, leave the job after a few years. And I think we all know that this is often explained, the fact that women leave the profession, that it has to do with family duties, they get children, and therefore they leave the industry. But these findings, and also other findings, research, shows that maybe it's actually gender-related discrimination that is the main cause for this. And again, some argue that, of course, but media is not worse than any other sector. Sexual harassment, it's all out there. But I don't think that's a valid argument at all. I mean, the media is supposed to be a pillar of democracy. It's regarded as the fourth estate. I think we can expect so much more from the media. And also I want to stress that this is really important. This is not an African problem, not at all. I mean, we heard from Isako, it's a global problem. And even in Sweden, like Anneli was telling you, I mean, it's all over. And again, I mean, it's totally unacceptable from a human rights perspective, from a women's rights perspective, but it's also a serious hinder to build a sustainable media sector. And again, if I just go back to this barriers project, it's not only collecting data. It also is it's an action-oriented project that calls for a number of measures to address situations, and it's all in line with what we're going to work with here today and tomorrow. The Kigali Declaration, the recommendations fit so well into the declaration. Okay, so what else? What I wanted to end with was actually to say that the work that has been done with the gender report, the report here in Rwanda, it's actually a really good case, it's a good practice that shows the importance of research and local data, because the findings, as you already heard, they have actually initiated a process to set up an anti-sexual harassment committee and the corresponding policy. So this is through the attention that it was given and the indignation that it woke. This actually, it gave birth to this process. But I'm not going to go more into it because we have Arthur Asimwe here with us from RBA, and he was one of the initiators. So I'll leave to you to tell this story.
Thank you very much, Agneta. And like you rightly said, this is an example of research-informed action. Arthur, perhaps you can tell us more about how RBA is responding to such data and the actions that have happened since they were presented to you.
Thank you very much, Yemis. I think this is one of the toughest panels I've been on, because the topic is so touching, and I think I must say that I feel so guilty. I feel guilty because, as a media manager, someone who has been in a leadership position within the media space, and as a male, I think we have not done a lot. We've not done enough. We've not paid enough attention to this issue. Thank you. I was shocked by the data that came from the study that she was just talking about, that showed that almost 45% of our colleagues, the females in our organizations, experience these forms of violence. That's almost half, which is shocking. And it came at a time also when in my own institution we were getting these cases, some coming to me directly. And when I look back, I think we did not even handle them very well, because of maybe not giving the due attention it deserves, but also putting in place mechanism that should be able to address such cases whenever they do occur. So I feel embarrassed because of that. But the good thing is, we have now put in place a policy. There's a policy that has come up. And at least the policy gives us the guidelines of how we should be dealing with such cases whenever they arise. I'm happy that 2 weeks ago, last week, we signed the anti-sexual violence mechanism that we are going to initiate within our newsrooms. But for me, I think broadly there are two issues. Number one is ownership. Ownership on the part of media managers. And ownership means what? It means paying attention to these issues. Paying attention, but also taking action whenever such cases come up. The second thing is awareness. Because some people don't understand, GBV might be so broad. But what's the physical violence, psychological violence, verbal violence, all these things, we need to be able to broaden the awareness within our media organizations, within our newsrooms, to ensure that everybody understands. When we're talking about gender-based violence, what are we talking about? What are the different forms of violence that we have? And at RBA, I think we want to even initiate a portal, an online portal, where a case like this emerges and someone maybe is shy, is not comfortable to bring it up. You can send a complaint through a portal, and then it goes to our HR department for us to be able to address it. So I think broadly what we need to do is to accept that this is happening within our midst, and we need to take serious action. On the content side, and speaking for RBA, on the content side, we have made it part of our policy that at least in our programs, in our news stories, at least a minimum of 45% of voices have to be female. And we do measurements. We do weekly measurements. And at least now, you see, of course, we haven't reached our target that we want, but we are on the right path to that. So that, we ensure that if a reporter has gone out there to cover a conference, a big conference, political conference, you're not only preoccupied with voices of strong political men that are speaking and ignore, the voices of our female colleagues. So we put these measurements in place and make sure that every week there's a simple tool we use and measure and see how many stories were broadcasted the whole week, how many female voices and children voices, and also, of course, also measurements for rural folks for that. So I think as a male that is running a media organization, I think the only thing I can say today is that let us have ownership. Let us be sensitive. Let us know that these things are happening within our midst and take concrete action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arthur. I think what Arthur has managed to do there is to demonstrate to us, number one, the importance of acknowledgements, right? Because sometimes when you present such data to a room with a majority of male listeners, there is a tendency to kind of defend or to excuse, but actually what Arthur is saying there actually is important that we face up to the data and then to take action. But they're not just taking action, but monitoring and evaluating that action to make sure that it's actually having the desired results. So thank you very much for your contribution. So how are we addressing these things in the draft declaration, Dr. Macharia?
So the draft declaration acknowledges that women media workers are across a whole spectrum of roles. There are those without remuneration, there are those who are employed in the workplace, they are freelancers, they are informal workers, and they are all subjected to gender-based violence while doing their work, one way or the other, in the workplace and in society when they go out to get the stories. So in the declaration, we include one fundamental principle on the need for media organizations, associations, and unions to address and combat sexual harassment and other forms of violence against women in the physical and in the online workplace. So the declaration contains a number, the draft declaration contains a number of recommendations for media organizations and for other stakeholders. So for media organizations, for example, we talk about putting in place anti-sexual harassment policies, and we see that Rwanda is already a step ahead of that, and anti-discrimination policies in the workplace, anti-discrimination including on issues to do with hiring, with wages, and career progression. So for media associations, unions, and networks, the recommendations in the draft focus on the internal gender policies, on reporting mechanisms, as well as on staffing for specific roles that have to do with anti-violence. And then we also have included a role for media development organizations and funders, and that is to see the entire range of stakeholders, including civil society, when they work on these issues, to collaborate with the stakeholders within the industry and outside the industry in monitoring, in holding accountable, and in overall injecting professionalism in the industry's handling of GBV content and GBV in the workplace. So in a nutshell, this is what is covered in the declaration. Hopefully in the draft, hopefully we'll be able to expand on this, refine on this, when we have the roundtable discussions tomorrow afternoon.
Thank you very much. And as I mentioned in my opening remarks earlier on, AWiM is at the end of the second year of a 3-year project in Nigeria, looking at reporting, media reporting violence against women and girls. And we're looking at it both from the perspective of reporting and the kind of language and framing of stories related to GBV, but also the experience of women in media. So I'm coming back to you, Dr. Machara, in terms of why is media representation important in this conversation?
First, it is a policy, it is enshrined in policy. It's a policy aspiration. We have it in the Beijing Platform for Action, we have it in the Maputo Protocol, and in various other instruments that either have been adopted at the national level, at regional level, at global level. And for example, in the Beijing Platform for Action, in the section that talks about violence against women, the media's role in eliminating gender-based violence is acknowledged in the ways in which media propagate certain, discriminatory social norms that then underlie those power asymmetries that lead to or excuse or normalize gender-based violence. So it's a policy objective, that's one. And then secondly, it's part of media professionalism. When we consider the tenets of professionalism in journalism, we talk about accuracy and balance and fairness, but do we look at this from a gender lens? So when you're talking about gender-based violence, how are survivors of GBV represented and portrayed? What does that say to what's happening out in society? Does it say, is it excusing, is it normalizing, or is it saying this is something that needs to be dealt with? So media representation definitely then plays a role in then shaping how we relate to each other as women and men, as boys and girls, and what that says about, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. So definitely representation has a role to play in the lived realities of violence in society, of all women and girls, of us all.
I suppose those are examples of what I said earlier on about being in a privileged position that allows us to make our societies care about this issue. Ms. Ako, do you want to come in also on this question?
Yes, for me, it's really important for the media to be on this conversation, but because simply, journalists can break the silence. More often, those issues are, delegated to the private sphere, where, and without the media, we would not be able to break the silence about gender-based violence. And we have, I think already in Africa, 10 years ago, one successful experiences of Liberian journalists who talk about female genital mutilations, and then the governments already took some measures to protect the right of women and to fight against those, practices. So it's really important that media play the role of breaking the silence on those issues.
And thank you very much, Ms. Ako. And Agneta, again, how are we approaching this in the draft declaration?
Okay.
Oh.
Sarah has already mentioned a few things. I'll add to that. But first, I just wanted to give you an idea. I often meet with groups of journalists. I do workshops and trainings, and we talk about gender equality. And what I often bring up is this discussion about what about professional journalism? We have, as Sarah was saying, is accurate, relevant, etc. But is gender equality and diversity, is that not also, should that not also be part of for journalism to be professional? There are so interesting discussions around this. And I can feel that this has gradually changed. It's much more accepted now, and people, I did an exercise just a few weeks ago, you know, this one when you could choose stand, you stand in the middle or to the left or the right, and almost all of the journalists now chose, it was the left side, to say that they thought that gender equality is actually part of professional journalism. So the needle is changing, we just need more of it. So in the draft declaration, as Sarah was already mentioning, we suggest a number of measures that has to do with content and gender-based violence, adopting specific guidelines for ethical, balanced GBV reporting. That is one thing that is very basic. Also to ensure that the staff is trained or sensitized when it comes to gender-based violence reporting. For example, how to interview survivors of gender-based violence. That's really important. For associations, unions, and networks, it's again that's also supporting their members, the sector as such, through training and resources to produce content that is actually gender GBV sensitive. And develop and encourage adoption of monitoring and implementing of these kind of guidelines. But I think it's important that there are different levels of policies, and if we look at the newsrooms, at the news media organizations level, then we have the editorial guidelines, but there's on the other level, with the associations, unions, etc., often we have industry code of conducts, and it's quite rare today that gender-based violence is referred to. And this can change. I mean, there are a few ones that now refer to gender equality and gender sensitivity, but there's an enormous job. When there's a revision coming up for code of conduct, you should be there and push to include this on an industry level that will later be used as a blueprint for the media houses. So I think that's really important.
Sarah, as chair, do you have anything else you want to add to what Agneta said around how we're addressing this in the declaration?
I think that she's covered most of what we have in the declaration. Maybe one other thing I could add is the role of media associations. This is one of the recommendations. Media associations and unions and networks to increase the technical capacity as well as equip the members with the tools such as the editorial guidelines, templates, to report on gender-based violence, you know, in a professional and ethical manner, one, and two, to address these issues in the workplace.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. So the declaration is an action instrument that speaks to a range of stakeholders. And the question is, who are these stakeholders and what are we asking them to do? And most importantly, how do we hold them to account? Okay, I think it's important that we acknowledge that whilst the declaration is the first, it's certainly not the first time that we're trying to address this issue in media, or that it's the first time that it's been discussed, nor is it the first time people are calling for meaningful action. So let's talk about collective action, Ms. Sacco, towards policy change in this regard.
Okay, I think we already talk about policy within the media houses, and for example, Rwanda has a success story. We also work with AWiM23 in Kenya to create a model policy against sexual harassment in the newsrooms. So this is one thing. You also talk about media associations, but when it comes to the online violence, I think we really need to make the digital platforms also accountable on those issues, because it's not only the responsibility of the victims to protect herself. We really need to have them in the conversation as part of the co-regulations relating to, gender-based violence online, but also work together with the government, regulators. That's why we have the regulators, and of course, journalism association, fact checkers, etc., to address the issues of online, because it's a very complex ecosystem, so we really need to work all together, civil society, academia, government, regulators, and the digital platforms. And I think what is also important that, in addition to those measures that we take, we need also like a massive media literacy, It's not only for people to have better critical thinking, when it's related to stereotype, gender bias, but also more generally, how to detect disinformation, how AI function, how the algorithm function on social media. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Arthur, you've already talked about some of the action you're taking. Do you want to talk more on this topic of collective action and towards policy change?
I think, Yamis, we need to scale up this conversation to especially to the African continent. I just remember yesterday I chaired a meeting of the Executive Council of the AUB, the African Union of Broadcasters. And it's made up of 15 Director Generals. And unfortunately, there was no woman. The only woman we had on the call, it was an online meeting, was an assistant to a CEO who was taking minutes, which is very sad. So I think we need to scale up this conversation. I think I want to commit, as the chair of the AUB, to invite you to our next General Assembly, which is happening in Botswana sometime next year, to come and have this conversation there. Have this as part of the agenda, so that my colleagues also understand. It's a club of men that need some whipping to see that these things are happening within our midst, and we should be able to address them. So let this declaration, the Kigali Declaration that we're going to be launching tomorrow, be some tool that we can share with my colleagues when we meet next year. I think that's a contribution I would want to make to this.
Thank you, Alpha, and of course, I accept the invitation. Thank you so much. All right, and we spoke earlier on about online violence and new media, and so there is a third-party platform accountability in this conversation also, Misako. So talk us through some of the things happening around that.
You mean accountability of? Yes. So this is what I mentioned previously. So too often when it comes to the all these online harm that target women's, but also the rest of the public online, too often there is no clear accountability from the platforms to address that because of the lack of transparency. When you are a victim of online harassment or targeted attacks, who would you report to? You even don't know who is the contact behind all these Facebook platforms, Twitters. You don't know who to contact, so there is a lack of transparency. And those platforms are making benefit out of the users' content, and this is why we really, UNESCO is pushing those platforms towards more accountability. We have just released early this month the guideline for regulating digital platforms, So this is the guideline for regulating, but our main objective is to protect the freedom of expression of the users. So, and all these platforms, out of the benefits they're making, they should be also allocating the resources to empower the users so that users know how to navigate. And we know from the research that we have undertaken, you know, the content moderation is often delegated to the, AI. And in some cases, you have human beings. But those human beings, if they are able to moderate, content in English or major languages, when it comes to the minority languages, and we have seen the case for Ethiopia, they are completely unable to tackle the issues. So I think it's really important to recall the responsibility of all these big tech companies when it comes to, gender-based online violence as well.
Thank you very much. And from the Media Development Organization perspective, Agneta.
Okay, thank you, Yemisi. I'm representing a media development organization myself for your Media Institute, just to be transparent. But I want to start with the funders. I think the main thing is here for the funders or the back donors to really understand the role of media in fighting gender-based violence, the interrelation in between the two, and that any agenda on eliminating gender-based violence have to include also media, the media analysis. So we are not working in silos, because that is often the case. And also, of course, make funds available for this kind of work that is related to media and gender-based violence. And I also want to say here that we're really thankful for the holistic and sustainable support that prioritize these kind of issues that from Sweden and Switzerland here in Rwanda. And for media development organizations, I would say that what we need to do is firstly intensify the good work that is already being done to support partners and find new partners that take these issues seriously, gender-based violence related to the media. And I think that what has happened here in Rwanda, we have already heard a bit about it, is actually a very good example of good practice when collaboration between local actors, local partners like RBA, the Women's Association, Journalist Association, RFEM, Women Media Owners for Change, and Women Media Platform, when they work together with FOYO's program, Rwanda Media Program, as a supporting partner. And I also want to mention another good example, good practice, is the work that One IFRA has done. I mean, on a global level, the toolkit and the handbook for employers and employees that they have created, that has been translated into so many languages, and the work they do with sexual harassment training. And there are so many other good examples, but this needs to be scaled up and further developed. But in general, I think the moral and financial support is really important from media developments and donors, and to facilitate dialogue and to multiply good practice, and also very timely to contribute with financial resources to the grants fund that will be set up to realize the Kigali Declaration. And overall, I think it's really important with a holistic thinking where gender equality and diversity are given dimensions of viable media, not only talking about social responsibility and human rights issues, but also about the bottom line and business models. There's recent research from ACAS that shows that there's a considerable gender gaps in news media consumption, so there are also enormous financial opportunities if you take gender equality serious as a media business. And one concept that takes a stand, how important it is with social dimensions for the future of journalism and for the sector as a whole, is sustainable journalism, a concept that For Your Media Institute is really deeply engaged in. I will not go more into that now, but it will be presented tomorrow in a session by MacArthur Foundation. Okay. Thank you, UBC.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to end with you, Dr. Macharia, in summing up for us, who are the stakeholders that the declaration is speaking to, and what are we asking of them?
Sometime last year, in 2022, the UN special mandate holders on freedom of expression and opinion issued a declaration. And in this declaration, they dubbed what they called a whole of society approach to addressing gender justice issues in the media, in and through media, gender justice, and freedom of expression. So this is really almost the same tack that we've taken in the declaration. We are seeing the entire ecosystem of actors and seeing what their role can be in this. We have talked about the media development organizations and funders, talked about their role. We've talked about the unions and associations and networks. We've talked about individual journalists and other content producers, those who are producing news. And then we mentioned the digital platforms. I think one that we haven't talked about quite is the journalism training institutions, media educators and researchers. And this is what we are asking of them. In terms of curriculum and research agendas. And we had a lot of debates within the committee to see what can fly, what can work, what are the low-hanging fruits. So for educators to offer a mandatory topic on gender ethical GBV reporting in core course modules in journalism, media, and communication study programs, that's one. Another one, and there are a number of them, but these are, I think, the priorities. The research, collaborating with students to conduct independent studies in under-researched areas on GBV, media, and journalism. And then I know we've kind of talked a little bit about civil society stakeholders, and while we do not have a specific category for civil society, we mention them in almost all the range of stakeholders, and collaborating with civil society to develop this knowledge, like the data that I presented earlier from the Global Media Monitoring Project, which is a massive civil society effort, and the next one is happening in 2025. So collaborating with civil society to build this knowledge on GBV in and through the media, and to apply the evidence and in content monitoring and other methodologies to use these findings to contribute towards transformation of media practice. So these are, all the stakeholders that we have included in the draft declaration, and in the deliberations tomorrow, perhaps you're going to see others that the committee, did not quite specify, but in a nutshell, this is what we have. And we do hope that this is going to be, and we acknowledge when we were having these discussions to come up with a draft, we acknowledge that there are many spotty initiatives in countries and sometimes in certain media houses within countries, but what lacks is that overall, overarching framework to bring these efforts together. How many here would like to see Africa not be at the tail end when we do this research next time? I'm sure almost everybody, yes. So when we harness all these efforts together, then we can pull our continent up, and we can address an issue that is dire in our continent more than in other parts of the world.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I think you heard her there. That's the next Global Media Monitoring Project is 2025. So I encourage all of us to find Dr. Macharia during the break and discuss how perhaps our organization might help contribute to that report. So thank you very much, panelists, for sharing your insights and expertise. We have the opportunity for just for one question, unfortunately. We only have a couple of minutes left. And does anybody have any pressing questions they want to pose to the panel? Christine, I think you press your mic button and then... yeah, it's on.
Thank you very much. As the panel was discussing, I was just dying to make these like 10 seconds statements. One is, I think, one of the things that we really must do and must do now is go the direction the gentleman has spoken about, approach the EU with something really concrete, and make gender-based violence, whether it is in the media or outside of the media, elevated to the level of violent extremism. The way governments take such serious action to violent extremism, they ought to take the same seriousness when they deal with gender-based violence. Second thing is, I think from this conference we need to come out with tangible terms of definition of what gender-based violence is. Then now it can be acted upon, because then it is visualized in the minds of the public, consumers of information, people who are sources of information for journalists, the management and teams that are inside the media houses. Once that concept is, if you like, generic or uniform, then we can take action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. I'm sorry, we don't have time for another. Oh, I will honor your question. No problem.
Merci. Je voudrais juste dire que parmi les points forts de la déclaration de Kigali, cette notion de reddition des comptes, accountability. Ça a été mentionné, je voudrais le redire, parce que c'est très important. Dans tous nos pays, il y a un cumul assez impressionnant de chartes déontologiques, de chartes internes des entreprises de presse, de codes de bonne conduite par rapport à ces questions du traitement des droits des femmes et de la violence. Mais on ne sait pas ce que ça devient. Il n'y a pas de véritable mécanisme concret de reddition des comptes. Et donc pour moi, c'est très important que la déclaration ait mentionné cela, mais je propose que l'on fasse attention à un nouveau concept qui a émergé dans le cadre de ce que Misoko Ito a mentionné, les efforts internationaux, notamment de l'UNESCO, pour la régulation des plateformes. Et cette notion, ce concept, c'est celui de l'analyse des risques. Risks assessment. C'est très important d'introduire cette démarche et cette vigilance au sein des écosystèmes médiatiques à travers tous les acteurs de la chaîne de valeur médiatique, parce qu'il y a des décisions qui sont vectrices de risques, il faut les calculer. C'est une manière d'anticiper les atteintes aux droits des femmes et c'est une nouvelle rigueur à introduire dans le fonctionnement de nos systèmes médiatiques.
Thank you. My French is not all that excellent, so I got part of that. And Misako, do you want to?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, she put the emphasis on the importance of risk assessment or due diligence on human rights within the media ecosystem. So we have this recommendation to the digital platforms to do the human rights due diligence and risk assessment in terms of, online harmful content. But she was suggesting the same approach within the media ecosystem to fight against gender-based violence. So within the media houses, within the, journalist associations, what's the entry for that kind of risk and how we can mitigate?
Yeah. All right. So thank you. I'm sorry, we don't have time. We've got several questions on this side of the room. I'm so sorry. Do we now have the poll questions, Irene? Yes? Okay. So if you wouldn't mind taking out your smart devices once again and scan this QR code. This is a different poll to the one previously. And the question is, who are the key stakeholders that can help the declaration be effective locally in your countries? So, Irene, if you can show the actual poll. Hopefully this time there's no error. Okay, brilliant. All right, so still populating. Ooh, can we have it back up? All right, so I think all of the above seems to be, the main options being selected there. That is to say, everybody has some kind of role to play, and followed by authorities and regulators. So I think it's really important to recognize the roles, certain national, regional policies can have. All right, thank you. So thank you very much to our distinguished panel for their insights and expertise today. It's been a pleasure to moderate this session. And I want to end with a reminder for you to please take notes throughout the next couple of days that would help us in co-designing and adding to the work already done regarding the draft declaration. So thank you, panelists, for your expertise, and to the audience, thank you all for your participation.
See, I would like to we're going to have a break, and a short break before we join the panel discussion. We will have a panel discussion in various rooms. Our esteemed moderators and panelists will explore critical facets. In the room Isaro, we will have the moderator, Regine Akil-Mutima. The panel will address violence and barriers against women in media. And in room Muhazi, we will have Suzanne Makore, who will lead on the violence and barriers against women in media as well. And here in Kilimanjaro, we have Onet Isimbi. It's going to be a panel focusing on sexual harassment in media, shifting from awareness to action. And in Rubavu, there will be exploration of tools and resources for proposal writing and reporting and online and field safety. It's going to be with Bongiwe Tutu and Thomas Letoba, please. Let's have a short break before we join those panel discussions. Thank you.
I'd like to call our panelists, esteemed panelists, who are going to wrap up this day for us in a short and sweet manner. I will begin by calling up to the stage Omoholo Taonyane, and I'll read out her bio as she comes up on stage. Omoholo is the founder and executive director of GBV Monitor in South Africa. GBV Monitor is an NPO which is focused on research, tracking, and tracing of GBV cases, as well as systematic evaluation of the rural criminal justice system. The organization has developed an online GBV tracker. So if you type on your phone GBV Monitor South Africa, it will bring you the tracking tool that they have developed. And it's actually South Africa's first platform that is dedicated to tracking GBV cases. Omoholo is an astute media professional. She's serving in the country as a political communicator, a consultant and a media practitioner at E-News Channel Africa, Parliament of the Republic of South Africa, Talk Radio 702, GBVF Presidential Response Fund, as well as local government institution. Currently, she's a regional communications lead at Gender Responsive Resilience and Intersectionality in Policy and Practice. This role entails using her knowledge and expertise to advise and support NGOs in South Africa, as well as Zimbabwe, Uganda, Tanzania, and South Sudan. I will call upon our next panelist, Caroline Ashaba from Uganda. She's a journalist by profession. She has a bachelor's degree in mass communication, as well as certificates in media management, digital journalism, and using social media to source as well as spread science journalism, among others. Caroline has worked with the Uganda Broadcasting Corporation, UBC, and still contributes as a freelancer. She has extended her expertise to create her own online news media channel, and it's called the One Africa Media, where she's also currently the CEO of Inspire Women Uganda. So a lot of positive stories going to come out of our panel today. Through Caroline's love for journalism, she has been able to be a link between the media as well, and has represented Uganda at the Science Forum in South Africa, and as well as Africa Women in Media Conference in past years. Dr. Kai is a postdoctoral fellow at the School of International Journalism and Communication, Beijing Foreign Studies University. She's a Kotel PhD of the University of Chinese Academy of Social Sciences and Macquarie University in Australia. She majored in journalism with a research focus on communication and social development, particularly gender issues in Africa media. She's a member of the South African Communications Association since 2019, and she's also a member of the International Association for Media and Communication Studies in 2020. Dr. Jigwe Zhang is a lecturer at the College of African Studies at Beijing Foreign Studies University. He's a Kotutel PhD of the University of Chinese Academy of Social Sciences and Macquarie University in Australia. He's also a member of the Chinese Society of African History, a member of the Australian Political Studies Association, and a part-time researcher at the Egyptian Studies Center of Zhengzhou University. His research interests include modern and contemporary African history, modern and Middle Eastern history, African politics, and international relations.
Hello, everyone. It's an honor for me to be in this room of great minds. I would like to start by saying, as we join in the campaign of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, what a great theme in the right season, where we see escalation of gender-based violence, which has almost been normalized today, especially when we focus on the media industry and how it reports or airs concerns on this issue. So we are basically talking about the role of media in countering misinformation and disinformation on gender-based violence. Maybe to re-echo this, I know maybe you know the definition, but in general terms, gender violence is referred to as harmful acts of abuse directed to a person against their will because of their gender. It is usually rooted from aspects of inequality and is experienced by both men and women. Although statistics from the World Bank portal show that with over 736 million women in the world, 1 in 3 women are mostly affected, either physically or sexually. And as of 2021, according to a DW report, the number of women in Africa subjected to gender violence is at 44%. And according to a report from the Africa Center for Media Excellence, ACME, 73% of female journalists have experienced gender-based violence, both physical and online. So that the statistics are alarming, and there is a lot that still needs to be done. And when it comes down to our sub-theme, which is the role of media in countering misinformation, disinformation on gender-based violence, I'll first point out how in the previous years, media was mostly a male-dominated industry until women or young ladies later joined in the field, although the percentage is still small at only 18.3% as compared to men, which is at 26.6% globally. In Africa, we are glad to also see the numbers of women in media growing each day, with many falling in love with journalism, with the journalism, communication, and media studies in general. Yes, we'll surely say the work is great, but what picture has our lovely media painted and is still painting for the women in this industry that prompts issues of gender-based violence? One may wonder, is it a way of promoting one's image or tarnishing her career? Fortunately or unfortunately, for some, different portrayals have promoted them both positively and negatively. But why is it done in the first place? One may be confused, how is it promoting? Well, some use it as to their advantage to gain fame, and it continues like that. Some see it in a good way, because of lack of awareness of how bad this is. And this is a question that we need to ponder about. Having been a male-dominated industry in the early years, media bosses later realized that getting ladies into certain positions to work, like news anchoring or particular entertainment programs, would actually attract more audience for the station, mainly because of their beauty, voice, and dress code, which was and is still dictated by one's target audience. This kind of mindset was then taken advantage of by the men to frustrate some women who mostly obeyed and swallowed the shame that came with such opportunities of work just to keep the job. This is still happening, not only in the media industry, but even other workplaces. Yeah, whereby most women do not report these issues, these cases, like most panelists have been mentioning, because of fear, and others, they know that even if it is reported, nothing will be done. For example, in Uganda, when it comes to gender-based violence or sexual harassment, the laws are still a bit weak. So when you go, like, for instance, to police, and you're going to report a case of maybe sexual harassment, they will ask you if you're bleeding or are you in pain. If you're not in pain, no, that's not a case. You go back. And if it's for, let me say, like media, they'll just tell you, concentrate on your job. That's all you need. I mean, ignore the rest. Like, I'll give an example. This happened to me. I reported a case of sexual harassment that was within the newsroom. And when I reported to my immediate supervisor, they didn't really act, so I went to the HR. And the best punishment they saw as punishment to give the perpetrator was to give me an apology. And that was it. But that was just an apology to me and what of the rest of the women working in the same field. And the person kept on doing the same. It was so, that's why some people just swallow it and be like, no need to report, which is sad. Maybe to highlight the examples of gender-based violence in Africa, to highlight, these may include family violence, child marriage, physical, sexual, and emotional assaults, female genital mutilation, trafficking of women and girls, to mention but a few. In Uganda, the most common are violence against women and children, and also sexual exploitation through trafficking of women and girls. This is still being done in the name of getting them better employment opportunities. When it generally comes to news coverage on gender-based violence and sexualization, the language that is still used to report calls for alarm. Okay, when generally comes to news coverage on gender-based violence and sexualization, the language that is still used to report calls for harmful gender norms and stereotypes on women. Some of the common gender stereotypes that are portrayed, especially on African media, include men are usually portrayed as active, assertive, and victorious, among others, while women are portrayed as the weak, the passive, the victimized, and laughable in many aspects. Following the above examples of the common stereotypes and general statistics, not ruling out the fact that men also face gender-based violence. Actually, they do, but the percentage is small. Women come out as the most affected, and I was noting, I will avoid calling them victims, they're actually survivors to gender-based violence, all stemming from the misinformation and disinformation done by the media, both online and mainstream media. However, I would also like to point out that there is an element of traditional mindsets that controls the media output of information, and this could be direct or indirectly, following the fact that most African societies believe in a patriarchal kind of setting, and thus whatever negative statement or action done to a woman may usually go unsaid or just viewed as normal, hence no need for alarm. So it kind of stems back to how people were brought up. Yeah. And then the media then takes up such information regarding it as truth without any fact checks, but just because that is how it has traditionally been dictated for long, hence bringing up elements of misinformation and disinformation to the public. It is from such mindsets and much more that a lot of misinformation and disinformation is done, posing quite a number of challenges, especially on the female gender. Maybe to note, misinformation is false or inaccurate information that is shared without intention to mislead. Disinformation is the kind of information intended to mislead. This is more like propaganda. When we delve into the challenges, I'll start with the females working in media who suffer both online and mainstream media violence, where they face intimidation at work, negative campaigns online are done to discredit their credibility, thus attacking their character. This has led some of them to completely leave the industry, as their cases are not usually attended to, like the previous example I gave. This has in turn also led to issues of sexual harassment, which includes unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and the like. This can be verbal, visual, and physical. Again, I will say both men and women are affected, but to go the highest percentage of the affected to are the female. But how are sexual harassment stories reported on different media? Usually the media tends to focus on how the survivor was dressed, whether they were drunk, and so on, thus placing judgment and bias already, rather than focusing on the perpetrator and his actions. The media should also avoid emphasizing myths around sexual harassment and also trivializing or downplaying the issue while making the news stories. The editing, language, and tone of the story should be carefully and sensitively done because they can lead to toxic responses, hence a problem unsolved. While the media is reporting on gender-based violence issues, journalists need to make good research on that topic so as to have their stories go beyond just a random social media post. Research would reveal better ways of empathizing and extending support to the affected persons rather than people scrutinizing them and assigning blame. So how best can media generally counter the spread of misinformation and disinformation? In order to build public trust, journalists must be trained on how to practice high-quality journalism that involves utilizing of research and statistics so as to come up with a well-informed news report. Media houses should establish strict screening of protocols with well-informed structures to ensure that only acceptable content is aired. And when it comes to social media, these platforms should reduce the role of hubs by, for example, demoting them in their feed algorithms. Users should also be warned about stories that have passed through long chains of readers. They usually get edited and thus spreading distorted information. In the same line, having readers and viewers sensitized more on how to identify fake news through digital literacy will enable people limit on what and what not to absorb. Insensitive and unethical media reporting of gender-based violence has direct ramifications on how the society understands this phenomenon, and it is upon this that I now get to explore some of the effective strategies that media should use while reporting on gender-based violence. While reporting such news, media should endeavor to prioritize the safety of the survivor, considering their right to dignity, confidentiality, and protection from harm. As a strategy, media should also avoid mentioning or identifying details of the victims, for example, facts like age, occupation, among others, because mentioning these may contribute to victim shaming, besides providing clues to the perpetrators. This brings me to the point of providing service details such as hotlines, shelters, and crisis centers, attaching them at the end of these stories. This will in a way draw attention towards positive stories of resilience and empowerment in the long run. Another strategy is for media reporters to learn adding context to individual incidents. For example, if it is sexual violence, they should include the data and other related issues in the region, which will help counteracting myths and outdated attitudes. Getting information from experts dealing with issues of gender-based violence should also be key so as to educate the viewers or readers, since they always have better information and experience on how to deal with gender-based violence cases. The media must also highlight the legal and social consequences of the act on the perpetrators and their family members. That is to say, the amount of punishment mandated by the law for the perpetrators and the legitimate risk of the perpetrator's family being ostracized by the community. The media should therefore be able to accurately report gender-based violence stories with knowledge to educate the public, since people go with what they see or read. In conclusion, to us, the public, we should speak up and be able to challenge the myths, stereotypes that surround GBV in different communities in Africa. This will come through us being open-minded to learn better. Let us educate ourselves by looking out for spaces like this, and with information that will equip us to have positive mindsets towards such issues, which will help us to be empathetic and support the survivors rather than judging them. At the end of the day, such crimes should not be justified no matter what. Yeah, thank you, AWiM, for creating such platforms to give us the opportunity to speak and learn from each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. I think she speaks for a lot of us. When we are in the newsroom and even outside the newsroom as consumers of news, there are certain things that we see. But at the same time, we also are at fault for not enabling our audiences to know the difference between misinformation, which we call fake news, right? Yeah? Disinformation, and there's also a third one. Does anyone know the third one? There are usually three. Yes? Malinformation, thank you. So allow me to read, before we transition to the next panelist, allow me to read for you a conversation which took place between a radio show host in Nairobi, Kenya, and his audience. This is what he said. We were having a conversation around Eunice, the 20-year-old lady who last year found a date on Facebook, went on a first date, and after that became immobile. She's still limping because apparently this guy that she found on Facebook invited her to his building, and they were to have a date on the 12th floor. And then guess what happened? The guy tried to make moves, but she said, "Yo, I'm not doing this. I'm not about this." And then the guy pushed her over the 12th floor, and now she's a cripple. And I'm calling on the ladies, you guys, you need to play hard to get. He later asked, do you think Kenyan Chiles, by Chiles he means women, do you think Kenyan women, he's asking the audience, do you think Kenyan women are too available? Are they too loose? Are they too willing? Are they too desperate? And that's why they get themselves caught up in such situations? Did he flip the script? Do you think he flipped the script? Yes. Was the issue diluted? Yes. If you were listening to this conversation, what feelings would it elicit in you as a man? What would you think if you had this conversation? Yes? Exactly, and this is just to illustrate what Caroline was talking about. The way we not only report, but even the talk shows that we host on radio. How are we portraying people who fall to GBV? People who are injured, people who are killed, how do we portray them, right? And for those who may not have followed the story, the guy was fired, and not because the media found him at fault, but it was because one of the company's biggest advertisers, which is owned by a woman, threatened to pull out. So they were fired, which is a win. But then, as our earlier panelists were talking about the way sometimes we don't do follow-ups on GBV stories, the media in Kenya did a follow-up, but you know how they followed up? If you Google the story, Shafi Weru fired, the links that you will see, the headlines that you will see, one of them is, "The real reason why I was fired." Are we still flipping the script? Isn't it? Yeah. Omoholo, please take the stage. Thank you.
I'll just talk briefly about what GBV Monitor South Africa does. So it's an NPO that was founded on the basis of a frustration at the time when I was a media working in newsrooms at the time, that the way that we were talking, or the way we were shaping the narrative on gender-based violence in South Africa was inefficient and was misrepresenting something that I will say is a crisis in South Africa. So the gap that it's meant to fill is to, number one, to document the lived experiences of women and children who report gender-based violence and how they interact with the criminal justice system. The second thing that we do is that we do research. The flagship program that we have is an online GBV tracker, which is the first platform in South Africa that is dedicated specifically to reporting, monitoring, and tracking reported cases of gender-based violence. And how we find these cases is, one, through the media. So if we see a news report on an incident of gender-based violence, we'll get in touch with a particular journalist or the organization to say, we would like to add this particular case onto our online GBV tracker. So those are the objectives. So in 2019, because we have a GBV crisis, our president had made a declaration that would be a roadmap to eradicating GBV. And there were a number of promises that were made. So we felt that it was important as an accountability platform to improve government's capacity to provide regular reports on GBV, because we don't have a platform that does that. We have to wait for the police minister every quarter to give us that report. And we also intend to support policymakers to identify and respond more effectively to institutional gaps in responding to violence against women and vulnerable people. So that will include, are there policies that companies have that they have in place on workplace sexual harassment? Do they have a zero tolerance approach to reporting incidents of gender-based violence in the workplace? And then to enhance, the collaboration between government, media, and civil society organizations to co-design what the solutions to ending gender-based violence would look like. Next slide, please. So this is what would happen if you logged into our online GBV tracker. We have a partnership with the National Prosecuting Authority, where all 11 of the provincial spokespersons, there's 9 provinces in South Africa, but they have 11 provincial spokespersons who give us data for us to include on our tracker. You will see in this example, this is the 70th case that we have on our tracker. If we have a case number that has been provided, it would be included there. It's not here, on this particular case. You have the name of the victim or the survivor with their consent. But in cases where it is children, we simply don't name or identify children for media and ethical reasons. And then if we have the name of the suspect or the accused, we would also name them and provide an age, the location where this incident has happened, the source of where this particular case that we are tracking comes from. So in this case, it's the National Prosecuting Authority, but it would be other media organizations that we are in partnership with. You would know whether the suspect has been arrested, what the nature of the charge is. Sure, they have been arrested, but have they been granted bail? How much was that bail granted for? You would then be able to see the prosecution status of this particular case. So if there's a postponement of a particular case, if there is a delay of any sort, we would be able to track that. And what makes us different from any other platform is the granularity of our tracking. If, you know, the point that has just been made by our previous panelist is that the media will simply report that there was a dead body that was found, her name is Omokholo, and they simply move away from that case. There isn't regular reporting and updates to tell us what has happened with this particular case. So that's the gap that we then come in to close in terms of following up, reporting and monitoring cases of gender-based violence. Next slide, please. And while I was preparing to speak to you here today, I thought that it would be important to ask first, why should media practitioners care about gender-based violence? And I'll speak more about South Africa because that is where the organization is currently operating, and that is the country with the highest levels of femicide in the world. So early warning systems on GBV point to the fact that we have a GBV crisis. So I'll give an example of the fact that with the recent quarterly crime stats report, over 11,000 cases of rape were reported. And that's the ones that have been reported. We know we have a big underreporting issue because of shaming and stigma. We have over 40,000 cases that have been reported of women who are victimized by assault. So that's just in a period of 3 months in South Africa. So those are very high numbers. But the problem that we have is that even though we see that women are coming forward to report, less than 8% of these cases will arrive at a verdict. And we know that at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, our president characterized gender-based violence as the second pandemic because it was seen as a very big problem at the time. So to such an extent that the numbers had spiked during the pandemic when couples were in lockdown, women were staying at home with their husbands, with their partners, and therefore they were locked in by the people who would then be abusing them. And it was important for us to really start asking about what the democratic dividend of women and children looks like in South Africa when you are more likely to be raped and murdered or assaulted than to receive an education. That is the reality in South Africa. So I will speak to 4 cases. Next slide, please. In 2017, there was this particular lady, her name is Karabo Mokoena, and she was murdered. Her body was found burned to ashes in a ditch, and it was then reported that it was her partner who had killed her. A young woman, I'm 22 years old, under 35, and there was a huge uproar. It was widely covered by the media consistently from the time that it was reported until we got to a verdict. And the hashtag that trended for a number of days consistently was #MEnAreTrash. And the media was such an important conduit at the time of social justice, because had we not had this particular case and this particular hashtag to follow, we wouldn't be able to get regular updates. The second case is Uyinene Mkhwetyana. She was a university student at the University of Cape Town, and she was going to a post office to collect a parcel, and she never walked out of that parcel. She walked in, she was raped and murdered by someone who was working there. And again, we had a hashtag that trended for a couple of days, a lot of responses from the government, political parties, the media, and the hashtag that went around was, "Am I next?" And that was a question that women were starting to ask themselves to say, when is it going to be my turn to be raped or to die? Because this is exactly what life looks like in South Africa for a lot of women. Next slide, please. This is Tshegofatso Pule, also fairly young, 28 years old. She was pregnant at the time where her body was found hanging on a tree. And it was found that it was her partner at the time who had organized a hitman to kill her. And that was because he was a married man and he did not want his wife to find out that he was having an affair. And at the time, the hashtag that went around was hashtag justice for Tshego. Next slide, please. Oh, please, previous slide. The last case that I will present to you is that of Nosicelo Mtebeni. She was a university student as well, 23 years old, and this is a case from just 2 years ago. And she was murdered by her partner as well. He cut her body up into pieces, put it in a bag, and left it on the side of the road. And it was after a stranger had walked around and said, "There's a very strange bag that is outside on the road. I wonder what is inside." And obviously when he opened it, he found pieces of her body in there. And at the same time, a lot of uproar, political parties, government making statements, and the hashtag that went around at the time was hashtag justice for Nosicelo. And what are the commonalities in all of these cases? Number one, there was a lot of public interest, one where the media really elevated all of these cases. Number two, these are all women who are under 30 years old, so youth, very young. The third issue is that they were all murdered by people that they know. It was not strangers. Only one case, in fact, was that of a stranger, but majority of these cases, it's intimate partner violence. And this brings us to a point that I think is important, and that is really starting to look for a space for advocacy media, because I think it's very important. In this case, yes, we have the hashtags that go around, and then journalists then follow these cases. But I think it's far more important to have an agenda that is placed in newsrooms to say, we have a GBV crisis in the country. We are not only going to report on these cases because the crimes are gruesome, but because in South Africa, women and children die, get raped, and murdered every day. So to the same extent that the COVID-19 pandemic had 24-hour rolling coverage, GBV should be given the same kind of prevalence in South African newsrooms. Next slide. And why urban bias reporting is misrepresenting GBV to the extent of being harmful to society, you will see there that we have top 30 GBV hotspots in South Africa. And when you look at all these places, I know we are coming from all across the continent, all around the world. What I will explain is that the top 10 of these areas are in rural localities. These are not in urban areas. And what you will see, and what I've already presented with the 4 particular cases that got a lot of media attention and public interest, is that these crimes were happening in urban areas, that is Johannesburg, East London, Cape Town. The media is very silent, or I'll say unresponsive, when it comes to reporting on the experiences of rural women, the ones who are not in urban areas, the ones who don't have access to social media and will most likely not even have the opportunity of getting a hashtag. And this is exactly why I believe that the media is misrepresenting something that is quite a crisis in South Africa. When you look at these 30 GBV hotspots, the closest area to Johannesburg is Temba, right? But that is still quite far removed from Johannesburg. And I think this is exactly why I believe that if we have an agenda in newsrooms that says we are going to seek out the stories, we're going to seek out the voices of normal women, the voices of people who are not of middle class, because all of these cases, it's women who are students, it's women who are working, but the stories of normal, regular, day-to-day women, it's very silent. What the reality should be, what should be presented, is the numbers that we are seeing in the crime stats report. We should see media becoming an accountability platform to start holding government accountable to the promises that they have made in terms of the programs that they've committed to in eradicating GBV. We need to see the media advocating for society as well, all sectors of society, to hold us accountable to changing our behavior, behavioral change programs, positive masculinities, so that we can start eradicating GBV in our communities. And I'll end it off with this particular quote by a feminist called Andrea Dworkin, who was presenting at a conference of engineers, male engineers, and she was given a platform to speak. And it was in an essay that she titled, "I Want a 24-Hour Truce During Which There Is No Rape." And she said, "We are very close to death, all women are. And we are very close to rape, and we are very close to beating. And we are inside a system of humiliation from which there is no escape from us. We use statistics not to try to quantify the injuries, but to convince the world that those injuries even exist." And I think that is just a way of just driving the point home, that GBV is not an event. It is something that happens every day. It is the lived reality and the vulnerability and the risk that not only women in South Africa are faced with, but across the continent, across the world. It's a global issue. And I will end it off there, but just to, next slide, to show some of the media coverage that we have. We work with radio stations, we work with TV stations, print and online platforms. So if there's interest from any of you who would like to contribute to our research, we are open to that. To collaborate at any level, we're very open to that. Thank you so much.
A round of applause. Thank you so much, Omoholo. I'm sure we have questions from the audience, right? Yeah? As you think about questions or any comments, additions you may have to this conversation, two things that come to mind as Omoholo was speaking is she gave a face to the statistics, to the numbers, right? Yeah. A lot of the times, the media is so focused on the numbers, which are, of course, important for context, but then you make the audience forget about the face. Yeah? I'm sure all of us will not forget the faces that we've seen up here, isn't it? Yeah? A second thing that Omoholo talked about is the hashtags. A lot of the times when it comes to GBV, for the media to pick up a story, they'll wait for something to trend, isn't it? Yeah? And as she rightly put it, that often makes us forget
that it is also happening to those who cannot, or rather whose names cannot trend. So will their stories be told? Yeah? Allow me to welcome our next speaker, Dr. Jiang.
Good afternoon. And, it's been a while since there's a man standing in his place. And I'm proud of it, and I'm proud to be part of this conversation and do my best I can do to this topic, gender-based violence. The reason I'm here, because you see, I'm with my wife, Dr. Tai, and I have three valid reasons that why I am here. And first, I studied African history and African politics, as I was introduced before. I know something about Africa. Second is the most important, is that I need to support my wife's career. It should be my job, And the third one is the one vital for me, that I can spur myself into the conception of cooperating and co-author with her with this paper. This paper, most part of the paper is done by her, by Dr. Tai. I just did some research on facts and some background research because I'm not an expert in media and by GDV. This is the word that I had just learned for a few weeks, GBV, yes. But I have experienced for years, before I go through this topic, changing mind. No, please, still the first one. Yeah, the representation of gender-based violence in African media. I need to share one or two of my personal experiences that convince myself to be part of this team. Although I'm a historian, I studied in history and politics. You know that history, when you turn on any historical books or read any information about international relations, no matter big or small, men are everywhere. Emperors, ministers, diplomatics, men occupy most of the part of the time and space. And when I learned Chinese history, we know that there are hundreds of emperors throughout 1,000 years history. Only one empress was reminded. Her name is Wu Zetian. I hope some of you know that it's in the history of Tang Dynasty back in 7th century. She struggled a lot for her power, but still was driven out, was replaced after her death. There's no succession of her blood for the queen. And the other thing is my personal experience, because I was born in the very, very traditional Chinese family. My family, my dad and my mom was very traditional, and I have no clue about how gender works socially or economically or any other aspects of our lives. So I know boys should do this, girls should do that. I don't know why they should do this. And until one day I saw my dad hit my mother severely. It's called, after I went to college, I know that's a real domestic violence. And that impressed me a lot. I didn't know what to do, because when the violence happened, I was only 12 or 13 something. The only thing I know was to try to find my neighbor and stop this violence. But I know in my heart that violence is totally wrong. But my mother chose to endure this and hidden inside his mind. I know he's very traditional. He knows his part as a woman. But since that time, I know this is not right. This is not true. This should not be the gender, how gender works socially in our lives. And my lucky day comes when I met my wife. She taught me how to be a regular person to see the gender issue, and how different gender makes their works going. And as for the media, the media stuff, I have no idea how media works until I met her. This is a great change for me as well. And when I was little, I know that there's a lot of media stories. I just believed them totally without selection. I know there could be some deceptions, there could be some fake news, but I just choose to believe them. But when I met her, she told me that I need to be, I need to choose, I need to see through facts, see through so-called facts from some media, and to identify whether they are true or false. This I tried my best. I tried my best, my best to do it, and somehow it works for me. There's one example I can give you is that in China we matter a lot of educational problems, educational things. There's one example that a well-educated young woman who had his PhD, she's hunting his job, trying to find a good teaching or good stuff in companies or colleges, but there are some other reasons that she did not find a job. The reason for the company or the institute is very simple. Her education is not solid. Why not solid? Because the universities or colleges where she graduates is not so good as others. But the real fact is that she may not be qualified with the job standards. So the media presented a very strange point that women cannot have good jobs unless they have good opportunity for going to better universities or colleges. This is a very bad misunderstanding and misleading information for all of us. So I learned how to verify things. Yeah, this is it. And back to the history part, history needs to find the truth, and the truth needs to be seek from our real life. So I learned that the change of social media in gender-based violence is it should be. I should learn more from that, and I need to help more people to know that you don't have to be a pro to support this kind of thing. Yeah, and let's get back to the slide. Sorry, could you please assume the introduction point? Yes, there are some conceptions I need to be clarified. The gender-based violence refers to any physical, sexual, psychological, or financial harm or suffering caused or likely to result on the basis of gender boundaries of person of sexual orientations. This is very important for me to learn. And violence against women is a global issue that affects everyone, and regardless of race, gender, class, or religion. And that since 2025, the Sustainable Development Goals, for the first time, includes specific goals that indicators for ending violence against women. At that time, I met my wife and I started to learn how to see these things right. And the UN gave the definition of gender violence of women is any act of gender-based violence that resulting or is likely to result in physical, sexual, psychological harm or suffering to women, including threats such as acts, coercion, and arbitrary and deprivation of liberty, whether occurring in public or private life. These conceptions means a lot to me, and this is the reason I decided to co-author this work with my wife. So the details, I will leave to the details of this article to my life partner, Dr. Tai. Please.
Thank you, my partner. He tried his best. Yeah, so back to my field. Let me introduce our research Yes, with the PowerPoint. So we try to analyze the reports from one African media or Africa, trying to find, that is one easy media for me because it contains a lot of African media. And we try to figure out, next please, we try to find out the reports from 2015 to 2019. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry. Yeah. And from the women volume, and we trying to sampling those samples for us to analysis. And next, please. And we will show our result. The first one is about this reporting on gender-based violence cases. Actually, we divided them into 4 types of reports. The first one is about this gender-based violence cases. First is the cases of sexual violence. Actually, here we have several frameworks. We use frameworks as to show the result. The first one would be lack of legal process, and this one we trying to we find out that normally the reports would vividly describe those victims, what happened to them. For example, they were cut into pieces, or they were hanging on the tree, sorry. Yeah, those kind of reports vividly showed what happened to the victims, but they never showed what's going on. What happened to those girls? And this kind of framework is actually, it kind of gave us this impression that horrible things happen to them and then nothing. And the second framework is covering up for the relatives. Actually, it is kind of complex because this happens to the rapes happen in families. So for stepfathers or fathers who rape their daughters, and the mothers would trying to cover this kind of stories. They don't want this thing out in the public, so they're trying to tell their daughters, do not say nothing, say nothing. And the next one would be the victim's responsibility. That one is the one that I don't like most, because most of the reports, they're trying to figure out that because the girl is wearing shirts, because the girl wearing very high heels, or because the girl went out with a strange man they don't know, or they met online. That's not the responsibilities they should take. Yes, because they just the victims. They should not be told as they were done something wrong, so that they were raped or they were killed. And the next framework is the family of origin. Actually, here the family means the killer's family. So those reports were trying to give reasons why those men killed others, because they have a horrible original family. Yeah, that's not the reason, I believe, actually. And so I'm not proud of those frameworks, so sorry. And about the domestic violence, here, like my partner have mentioned, in the culture that most of the families would believe that these abuse or these violence is just a family thing. They don't want these things to be a thing that would be talked by others. So they're trying to find reasons that women have been abused, or something like this, because the woman done something wrong. She didn't do the dish. She didn't do the jobs that she meant to do. So the man beat them. That's the framework they may use. And the next one would be the protecting women. Yes, this one is always covering for those reports that tell us there are some way for us to do to protecting women, like empowerment, though women like empowerment and trying to tell them that they are not relying on the husband, or they can be independent. And about sexual harassment, I'll be quickly. This one is, we are familiar because it happened in a lot of places like the workplace or anywhere else. And there are two types of reports. First one is the rights violation framework. This one tells us that this harassment is wrong, so we should protect ourselves. And the other one I'm not understanding is that they trying to use this victim seeking for their things, because they trying to keep silence because they're trying to like promote or get money like this. This is kind of work frame. Sorry, next please. And yes, next slide please. Yeah, and we put the gender-based violence as a whole topic because these kind of reports are talking about GBV as a whole thing. So there are kind of different types. I will move quickly. The impact of gender GBV that we should pay attention to is it mentioned always as a as it affects the nation's development and the personal development. Online GBV that I put an example here is because this girl, she's trying to share her experience about the cyberbullying and about her rape, about herself. But she received cyberbullying, and then she changed these kind of things into a motive. She set up a foundation trying to tell others that you can do better. And you can see her as an example. So for combating gender-based violence, that they are trying to find out ways to solve these kind of things, and laws and regulation against GBV that is only talk about legal guarantees. Victim protection institution here, I recommend ask if you are interested, because I highly recommend about one-stop center because it is a way that people can share, tell their experience once, so they don't have to suffer twice about what happened to them. And the other is the Rainbow. It is AI technology that was used in South Africa. And it's a way that we can talk to the AI and find out solutions or suggestions. So that you don't have to talk to a person that made you embarrassed or you don't know how. And different forms of combating GBV, that is about music and movie. Maybe tomorrow we will see about the movie. Yeah, it is a way that tell people what we can see from another way. And next, please. Yeah. This is the Rainbow advertisements, and the next one is, next one please. Yeah, about female genital mutilation, I will move it quickly. There are three frameworks. First one is a deprival of rights. Yes, it is a kind of way that hurts the children, girls' rights. And another one is a health hazard, because a lot of girls was hurt, even killed by this kind of surgery. The third one is a legal protection that reports trying to find out ways to, especially in legal ways, to trying to protect those girls from this kind of FGM. Yes, next please. Next slide, thank you. Yes, and yeah, like the presenters shared about the movements. I put 4 movements as example. The 16 Days Against Sexual Violence is like the the binds we are wearing, is still on nowadays. And reports is starting from, because of my example, starting from 2015 to 2019, each year they were focusing on the topic of this kind of movement. So they have different frameworks, and he for she movement, that is also a way that calling on men to stand together against the GBV. And I put example here is about this South African lady that she encouraged us to write love letters to those men, write love letters to women, to showing that men can stand together with the women. And the Me Too movement, we are really familiar. And here, what I want to mention is about those movements that have been localized, talking about what happened in the countries, in a different region of African country. And I'm a next movement, like she has mentioned before. About this one, actually, I was there. Yes, because I was in the SACOM conference. It was happened, the movement was happened when I was there. And I see the posters of the girl who was missing, who is trying, the poster is still talking about missing girls, and we were trying to find her. And then it started become a movement that people are talking about, am I next? And enough is enough. So we are trying to find ways to protect the girls, protect ourselves, and encourage the president to do something. Yes, that's what I'm talking. And I believe there are a lot of, slides. I will pass them on because of the time. Just show what happened. Thank you, please just go on. The slides. Next, please. Yes, the posters, and the next is about the he for she movement, and another one, about Me Too, and the poster, This is the one that I took because back on the posters, they were talking about how woman power is, what woman power is, and on it is the missing girl. So, next please. Yes, about the discussion. I will end it quickly. So, what we're trying to figure out is, like the title we use, changing mind. We can see that even though I put a lot of keywords together, we can see that there is changing minds from those reports. And if, especially when I met all of you, I feel so strong that, we do have media that pay attention to all of those gender issues, and I believe changing mind is happening. Even though we put a lot of stereotype reports here, but we can see that empowerment programs happening in those places and were reported by those reports that strengthening women's economic empowerment, such as the survivors of domestic, often make them better, and they feel that they are strong, they can be independent apart from their husband or the family, so that they can say no to those kind of violence. And so sorry for a little bit mess, but these kind of things, last thing I want to mention is the influence of the internet. Even though the president, even though that you have mentioned we should do something besides those hashtags, but I still believe that hashtag is did a little thing at the start, so that we can focusing on, we notice that there's something happening here, that from the online to the real society, that the media can do from those kind of things. So thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Kai. Thank you. So we'll have our final comments from Dr. Zhang, followed by Caroline, and finally by Omoholo.
Thank you. It's a really good opportunity for the non-pro like me, sitting in front of all of the professionals. My experience, just like I had shown half an hour ago, I suppose. Yeah, I forgot the time. So education is important for me because I won't let my kids, if I have any, yeah, it's still a secret, but yeah. Don't think about it. I won't let my kids go my path to suffer the ignorance of the gender-based violence, no matter in what kind of formation it should be like. The kids should know what is violence, what is gender-based violence. Yeah. Otherwise, their childhood will be exactly like mine. I suffered, and I realized when I realized that it was already too late. I somehow feel very sorry for my mother, but somehow my mother did not feel that she should be taken care of by mine, that she deserved respect. This is very it's a pity for me because she had been passed away for 13 years. Every year when I memorize her, I would tell herself that if I were still older enough to know this stuff, I would let her to have a better life with me or without me. But yeah, this is my promise for my future generations, and I hope it can be spread to the rest of the world. Thank you.
Caroline? Yeah.
Okay, I think my last remarks would be to emphasize women should learn to speak up. They should not think of the shame that comes with it, because most of them fear to speak up, fearing what people will say and things like that. But learn to speak up, because that's the only way you will be helped. And don't speak up when it's too late, because some come out when they don't have hands or when it's really severe. And at that point, you're just feeling sorry, like you've not really been helped. So you should learn to speak up whenever you realize gender-based violence is at play. And then for the media, I think we need to learn to report better and learn to not to focus more on the survivors or victims, but rather focus on the perpetrators and follow up the stories until the end. Thank you.
I'm going to repeat a little bit of what you said, but just to say, gender-based violence isn't a woman's issue. It is a societal issue, but one that requires men to stop violating women. We're at a conference where we're speaking about gender violence, and majority of the people who are in attendance are women. This place should be filled with men, because those are the potential champions of really transforming society for us to be GBV-free. And in terms of the media, I think we really underestimate how powerful we are as media practitioners. We really can change things. We really can put pressure on the system to ensure that change really does happen. We can report differently by focusing, what you just said, on perpetrators and not on victims and survivors. It doesn't really assist that much. So that's my parting shot. Thank you.
Thank you so much to my excellent panelists. So you remember the exercise we did before we began our session with the paper? So you know what my intention was with that exercise? And Omoholo has hinted to it. You don't know that you have the power to change something until you try, right? So that issue that you wrote on the paper, there's something you can do about it, because you're not the only one in this room who is going through it. But you know the irony of life? Sometimes you feel like the challenge is so big and you ask yourself, why is it happening to me? Yeah? And yet it has happened, or it is happening to other people. We are talking about breaking the silence, speaking up. If we don't speak up, we won't know that there are women going through sexual harassment, women going through GBV, and we won't be able to get redress. In the same way, with the exercise we did, and whatever is affecting you in your personal life, in your career, in your home, in your school, for the students in the room, you have the power. Yeah? Take back your power. Okay? Thank you so much.